Erika Flowers, welcome to the Single Track Podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Ben.
We have talked with many Nordic skiers in the lead up to this year's Speedgoat 50K race, and you're another one of them. I've become quite fascinated by this group of athletes, so can you give us a bit of background on how you got involved in that sport and where it took you before we start to talk about mountain running?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel really lucky. When I was 10 years old, my parents moved from Missoula, Montana to Bozeman, Montana, and they signed me up for the ski team as a way to get to know some new friends and build a community in Bozeman. And at the time, I just thought it was a fun excuse to go hang out with some of my new friends outside and play in the woods and scooch around on Nordic skis. But I think that's still a lot of what I love about endurance sports today. So I kept skiing from the time I was in fourth grade all the way through high school, and I had the chance to race a bit internationally in high school, which I think really set the hook. And then raced for Dartmouth College out east in New Hampshire for 4 years. And then my senior year, I'd planned to go to med school and kind of pivoted and decided to pursue ski racing full time. So I joined a team called the SMST2 team based out of Southern Vermont. And ski race professionally for them for 6 years, racing World Cup and kind of trying my best to make some Olympic teams and other international teams.
It's interesting that earlier in your career, you were deciding between whether you go to medical school or you continue on this professional track. And that's a pretty big life decision. So can you give us some more insight into why you ultimately decided to double down on Nordic?
Yeah, so during my junior year of college, I went down to Guatemala and worked in a tiny little health clinic on the edge of Lake Atitlan. And the purpose of that was to get some exposure and experience in the medical world and kind of solidify my path towards med school. And I think it actually had the opposite effect. So I was working, we take one of these tiny boats to different villages around the lake each day to provide healthcare in it. And I liked it and it was fascinating, but I found most of my time daydreaming about ski racing and trying to find ways to train for kind of my final senior year of racing. And so I was running around this little soccer field in this little village we lived in and trying to swim in the lake and find ways to stay fit. And I was missing the kind of spring racing that I would have been doing back in the States. And I think for me, it just made me realize, the thing that I'm spending all my time dreaming and daydreaming about is not medicine, but it's this other thing that I should probably go and scratch that itch and pursue that while I can.
I think that's super impressive and interesting because I think a lot of people fight to turn off those dreams and they just go with whatever is like a quote unquote safe or expected path. So I think that's interesting.
That's totally true. Like, I think part of why I loved the idea of medical school is because it was a very clear path. It's like, okay, you go to high school, you get good grades, you go to a good college, then you get good grades in college, and then you go to med school, and then you have a career. It's like very lined out. And I think I liked that personally. I'm someone who likes to have a plan. And so it was definitely a pivot for me to not go that way, but I'm so grateful I did. And it was like probably one of at the time it felt like kind of a scary flyer, if you will, but I'm just so grateful for it because I think it was some of the most fun years of my entire life was ski racing full time. When your job is just to be as fit and fast as you can with a group of other really fast and fit people. There's nothing better.
Yeah. Right on. Well, I'm curious, what ultimately made you transition into the world of trail and ultra running?
So ski training involves a lot of trail running. I think it's why a lot of Nordic skiers are generally pretty good on trail. I think a lot of our cross training, especially in the summer when you can't be on snow, we certainly roller ski, but we do a lot of kind of pretty easy level 1 distance training on trail. Almost every Sunday is like a longer over distance session. Sometimes roller skiing, but sometimes running. And so we'll often also just jump in running races as cross training. It's never the focus, but it's definitely a big part of training. And so when I was done ski racing full time, frankly, it was a lot easier just to get out running than it was to get out roller skiing and Nordic skiing after work. I still do that quite a bit, but was doing a lot of running naturally. And then my sister actually, she had signed up for this race called the Rut, it takes place in Big Sky.
Yeah.
And the first time she did it, she just had a really hard time, and she ended up not finishing. And she's like a very fit, active person herself, but it can be really hot. It can be really long. If you've never done something that long before, it can do kind of interesting things to your body. And so I said, okay, if you ever want to do it again, I'll train with you and I'll get ready for it with you, and I'll join you for it. And so she ended up kind of shortly thereafter saying, okay, I want to train for it again. And so I trained with her, and we wrote a little training plan and got ready to do it. And that was, I would say, my first like big more ultra running race. And then I think I had no expectations other than wanting to finish it. And so to be able to win, I think was a really fun introduction to that world, and made me excited to jump into a lot of other races after that.
I was just going to say, if I look at your ultra sign up, you've had a ton of success on the Montana trail running scene. I think you've had similar great races at Don't Fence Me In and Bridger, and you mentioned that you won the Rut, which is just a staple race in our community. Before we get into Speedgoat, though, my understanding is you had a non-running related injury earlier this season, so maybe your training block has been more of a recovery process than maybe getting into like peak fitness. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I knew I wanted to focus a little bit more on running this year. So I've still been ski racing in the winter, even though I don't race full time. Like I have a full-time desk job that I really love, but ski racing has kind of been more of a side project for me. But this year I knew I wanted to kind of put some of my ski training aside and try and do a lot more running. And so I was doing a lot of running this spring to try and get ready for a big race at the end of the summer. And I was running over in Helena, Montana, which is just a couple hours from Bozeman. And I was doing a point-to-point, and we'd stashed bikes to get back to our cars at the end of kind of a big 18-mile run with a good friend of mine, Annalise. And I don't know exactly what happened because I can't remember any of it, but somewhere along the 4 to 6 mile road ride back to our car, what I've gathered is that a farmer drove by, and I gave him a friendly wave, and I think I had my running shoes slung over my handlebars, and they just got caught in the wheel, and I went from going pretty fast on a road bike to a really hard stop, and it was my head that stopped me. So was very lucky to have someone with me who had an inReach and was able to get me to the hospital, and unfortunately didn't have kind of brain bleeding, but did have a fairly serious concussion along with some kind of facial lacerations and head lacerations. And broken bones. So I have about 5 bones that are broken in my face currently, and they're healing well, but they're definitely still broken. And then severed some nerves, so I don't actually have feeling in the right side of my face still.
And so, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. That's like, especially when it's non-running related. Like it's not even anything you're doing in training. It's just a freak accident.
Yeah.
What does the return to running look like for that type of injury, where like a concussion, for example?
So I think it can vary quite dramatically by person. I think that's the thing with head injuries. It's so different than like an elbow break or a foot sprain or something where you can see it. Like I think that's what's so interesting about head injuries is you can't see it in the same way you can a scratch or a wound, but it's very much has to be treated that way. And so I was lucky to have some really good advice early on, just to rest a lot, especially in the first 10 days. So I talked to one of my North Face teammates who has similarly suffered a head injury in the past, Fernanda, and she said the first 10 days are the most important, like rest as much as you can. And I think I listened to that and may not have totally executed it, except for the fact that I got COVID about 3 days after I hit my head. And so I was really forced to just do nothing for a while. And I've never slept that much in my life, but I think of getting COVID as probably the best gift I could have gotten at that time, because it forced me to not do anything. And my work was great. And, I didn't have to go back to work for some time. So I was able to really be off devices, off my computer, off my phone, and rest and sleep a ton. And that helped a lot. And then I think after that, it's been a really slow progression back to activity. So I had some great PTs I worked with who, it was starting with like a mile of walking. And it wasn't until I could walk a mile without kind of headache or dizziness that then I could, jog for 5 minutes. So it's been very, very gradual, but I would say being cautious early on and not overdoing it has gotten me to a place where now I feel like I'm like, okay, I can do pretty much anything I want in the mountains. I might not feel super fit doing it right now, but I can at least do it without it hurting my head.
Yeah. Have you been able to get any weeks in that build confidence for this race?
So last weekend, and I think it's an interesting question because it's like building confidence to be competitive versus building confidence to be able to do it. I think I have the confidence to do it. Last weekend was my first like bigger weekend, which I know is not ideal leading up to a race like this for that to come just a couple weeks out, but I was able to get a good like 25-mile day in the mountains, followed by another like 16-mile day with a lot of elevation gain, and just a lot of time on feet, which I knew I needed to feel like I could go into this race kind of prepared to at least kind of complete it, and not risk it hurting my head or kind of forcing me to take a couple steps back. So I was really encouraged to feel good after kind of a big weekend, not sure how my body or head would react. I will say it was one of the first times, I feel like usually I get done with those long runs and I'm the person who's like, oh, that was so great, let's go do it again. And we had planned this big route that was going to be 25 to 30 miles. And it was one of the first times I've had to say, I have to stop at 25 miles. Like that doesn't feel great as someone who's supposed to be running as like a profession to have to do that. But I think it's just trying to like be patient, knowing that will come as long as I give myself the time to get there. So I'm really excited for Speedgoat, but I'm also holding it in tension with the fact that I might not be exactly where I would like to be for a race of that caliber. And I won't really know until I try. So
given that I think almost all of your trail and mountain racing has been in Montana, I'm curious what draws you outside the state, and in particular, what motivates you to do a race like Speedgoat?
Yeah, so there's so many amazing races out there that I think I'm just getting to know the world of ultra racing and getting to know all the different races I could do. And I think that's kind of what draws me to it. So I did my first international race last fall, which was great. And it made me really excited to jump into more international racing and then explore all the different amazing trail runs that are around the US. So I feel like I'm very familiar with the Nordic ski racing world, and I'm very unfamiliar with the world of trail running. So I'm just honestly trying to get my feet under me in terms of, okay, what is Broken Arrow? What is Speedgoat? What are all these different races that I could do? Because, whether you're talking Cirque Series or you're talking kind of the bigger ultra races or Hard Rock that was last weekend, like there's so many that I feel like I'm just barely scratching the surface.
So I know you're a North Face sponsored athlete. I'm becoming a shoe head. I'm curious, what shoe in North Face's arsenal do you use for a race like Speedgoat?
So I've really been loving, I actually really like all of their Vective line shoes. I think right now I really like the Endurus too. I know the kind of the Vective kind of flagship line has the carbon plate, and a lot of people love that. And I think I will play around with that for some racing, but I've been feeling really good in the Endurus too. I think especially coming back from not running, like I effectively didn't run for a month. So to come back to running, that's been a shoe that's been really good, I think, for my body. And I'm excited to lace up in those and race in those. Cool.
Last question I have for you, and I'm more than happy to take it out of the interview after the fact, but I was scrolling through your Instagram and you made a really recent thought-provoking post observing that, we're at this chaotic and polarizing time in our country. And at the same time, on a lot of these social media platforms, we're only seeing content that tends to confirm our worldviews. And you put out this rhetorical question of like, what would it look like if I had more interactions with people in my life that maybe challenged my beliefs about certain things? And I'm curious if you're willing to talk about that a little bit, because, my feed is mostly running related content, but your post made me think a lot about a lot of assumptions I have in my own life. So take that wherever you want.
Yeah. So I love the question, and it's something I've just been thinking about a lot. And I think running is where I often have time to think and think more deeply about kind of what's going on in the world. And the recent kind of ruling on Roe versus Wade, I think, was a good example of, people are really frustrated. And I feel very strongly that, Roe versus Wade should not have been overturned. Right. But there are obviously people who don't feel that way. And I think we all feel so frustrated by, oh, how could the other side be so ignorant or what have you? But I feel like that frustration doesn't lead to a different outcome. Like all of us yelling into the void saying, this is stupid. What that person said was hypocritical. Like that's not getting us closer to an outcome where we can all feel bought into something that we've kind of created together. And I think in particular on that post, I was like, man, like running's a great way to do that because you're breathing hard enough that you actually have to stop and listen as opposed to just being the one talking the whole time. And I think that's one of those things that, like I scroll my social media feed and it's all people whose for the most part views really align with my own. And it's easy to get fired up and easy to look at all of that and be like, yeah, like, what's happening? The world's crazy right now. Like, how could it be that we've made this decision when everyone in my world doesn't believe this? But the reality is like, I'm probably not interacting with those people who don't believe in the same things that I do. And by not engaging, we're just getting like further into our corners. And so I'm curious about the ways in which we can bring that, we might not meet in the middle. We might not change someone's mind, but if we don't take the time to understand why someone thinks that way and just spend all of our time defending why we think a certain way, I feel like it's a lost opportunity to build a shared sense of community and understanding and ultimately build some sort of set of agreements or shared policy that can actually benefit all of us a bit more than it does currently. Because I think right now people feel like, the government isn't serving them the way they want to be served. And I think both sides would say that. So I don't know, that's kind of a lot of ramblings, but I think it's just like, I feel frustrated by all the yelling about why I'm right and you're wrong. And I'm just curious, like I want to go talk to 100 people who I disagree with and try and figure out why they think that way, because they're smart people and they have their own set of experiences. And I feel like having more of that understanding might help me also understand kind of my beliefs better as well.
Well, I got to say, and I think for the record, you and I probably share a lot of the same political views, but in a previous life, I was a field organizer for a political campaign, and I very much had all of my ideas set in stone. They had never sufficiently been challenged before, and my job was to go and knock on doors of people that were proven to be just very against a lot of what I believed. And at the very least, it made me empathize pretty deeply with where they were coming from. And I was unable to demonize them after the fact or think of them as like true opposition, because you just learn that almost every person on this planet is like a good person, and they want to see humanity like collectively rise up and thrive. And anyways, I know I'm rambling too. Anyways, it's been awesome to have you on the podcast. I didn't mean to go off on a whole political rant.
No, I like the question, and I think your point is a good one. So to be perfectly transparent, my dad is running for a state re-election in a state Senate seat.
Oh, cool.
So I've done some canvassing for him, and like I love it for the exact reason you said, but I think I've also been really frustrated by it when you knock on the door and the first question they say is like, oh, well, is he a Democrat or Republican?
Right.
Like they don't care what his issues are. And you get bad reactions on both sides. If he's running as a Democrat and a Republican answers the door and finds out that he's running as a Democrat, they'll just shut the door in your face. But similarly, Democrats, if they find out he's running as a Democrat, they'll be like, oh, I'm voting for him. I'm like, you don't even know anything about him. Why are you voting for him? So I think that's like, man, if we could all just like go on long runs and take the time to talk through all the challenging issues that there's no one solution for most of them. But I'd be excited about what we might learn about each other and about how we might work differently.
Well, and to close it up, Dylan Bowman, a former North Face athlete, has famously said that trail running will save the world. And I think that if you go on a long run, regardless of who the person is, it's going to be hard not to find some common ground. And that's part of the beauty of what this sport can unlock. Hey, so it's been awesome to have you on the podcast. Seriously stoked to follow your race at Speedgoat. I'll make sure to link to all of your social media in the show notes. Anything else you want to leave the audience with before we go?
No, I'm just excited to toe the start line. It's been a while, and I'm excited to see everyone else out there. It should be very competitive and a very hot race.
I know.
But I'm grateful to have the chance to speak with you, and thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you.